The world is in turmoil. Whether it's the crisis in Crimea and Ukraine, whether it's the disturbances and disorder in Syria and Iraq, we seem to be seeing the fraying of the international order, the unraveling, as Richard Haas put it.
At Crisis Group, we want to make the world a better place. A year and a half ago, nobody would have said Ukraine was going to change the face of Europe. Nobody would have said ISIS was going to change the face of the Middle East. We keep being surprised.
We are living in a profoundly more dangerous era. Geopolitics is coming back, and we see the fear factor coming back.
There is more disorder, but there are fewer providers of order. So many non-state actors have in their hands the decisions to go to war and peace.
It's very dangerous to make the decision that talking to a non-state actor is legitimizing it. And this has become more and more the policy. You don't make peace with the people you like, you make peace with the people you fight with.
I'd like to see the U.S. get out of the business of guaranteeing the world's stability, but it needs to do so in a way that it's handing that responsibility to regional and emerging powers.
Too often you see the focus on military force as a substitute for political thinking, and that's pretty dangerous.
There's a lot of things that have been said about Africa and a lot of confusion about Africa. New kinds of conflicts are emerging that act as impediments to much of this potential.
Africa should not be poor. Africa should be a very rich continent. The problem with Africa has always been governance and leadership.
There are two contradictory narratives on the continent today. One is Africa rising, and then one is still very much the old problems. There are a number of things to be said about the years of neglect in these so-called ungoverned spaces, which, by the way, are not ungoverned. They're just governed in the way that most of us don't necessarily like.
We are now talking about an agreement which has emerged from the depths of diplomatic bankruptcy to perhaps the most important potential achievement of the Obama administration and the Khamenei administration together.
We are talking here about a historic change. I believe that the agreement with Iran is the lesser of two evils.
With this deal, are we giving away all the leverage the international community has?
From a technical perspective, from a non-proliferation perspective, this is a very strong deal because the 4 pathways to nuclear weapons are effectively blocked.
One thing is for sure, Iran wants to get back to the international community.
If the program is good and it's realistic and it's an honest framework, it has to block any intent.
What were the lessons you learned from the North Korea history? I mean,
what we learned from North Korea is people lie and halfway programs don't work.
Okay. The signing of the agreement is not only an arms control issue, it's a question of identity.
If I were to describe the agreement, I would say it is now over the mountain, but has a lot of jungle to go through.
Myanmar has been heralded as one of the more successful democratic transitions in recent years. It was a peaceful, top-down transition.
It could be the first real democratic election they've had since the 1950s.
This is the moment where the promises of the reform process really get translated into political reality. There's a fundamental question here for the country, what kind of society does Myanmar want to become?
The war in Syria is now in its 4th year, with potentially destabilizing implications across the neighborhood for a generation. What started as a popular uprising morphed into a civil war, and now a proxy war.
What we're seeing is the regional proxy war slipping into something else, which is a direct confrontation through military intervention by these superpowers against non-state actors in Yemen, in Iraq, and in Syria.
For the first time, we feel there is a regional centered, alliance emerging on its own, trying to do something regardless of the constraints of the international powers in the region.
I think the worst policy that the administration could follow would be one of consistency. If, as a result of having negotiated the Iran nuclear agreement, the Saudis and others feel sufficiently insecure that they feel they have to develop a nuclear weapon. It would have just the opposite effect.
It's the political strategy that's the difficult one. The airstrikes are the easy part. We need to now explore what the possibility is for bringing these parties together to start discussing what their core interests are and how these can be preserved in Syria.
I don't know what will happen in Yemen, I don't know what will happen in Syria, but what I could say that this momentum is creating some kind of new, fresh approach and much more self-confidence amongst the Arabs and amongst the Saudis in particular.
We have been surprised time and again by Putin's actions.
Putin is a serial improviser. This means he could make some very silly decisions.
No one seriously thought that Putin would unleash the events in Ukraine that he did, but he did. So be prepared for the unexpected and be prepared for the ruthless.
The narrative that Putin has is that Russia is the victim and not the aggressor, that all Russia's problems are due to the hostility of the West, and it's an Anglo-Saxon conspiracy to destroy Russia.
What he really has achieved is that a country which was a very friendly Slavic brother nation seeks its own future in the West and with the West. If that's victory, I don't know what defeat is.
It let out of the bottle a genie that no one could push back in.
There is a winning strategy to make a wholehearted political commitment to help Ukraine succeed.